Imagine standing in Vancouver's Fairmont Hotel, surrounded by a sea of smug faces, their champagne glasses glinting like knives under the chandeliers. My father, the untouchable CEO, towers at the podium, his retirement dinner a shrine to his ego. Then he turns to me, his voice a venomous blade, "My daughter? She's a disgrace, playing soldier in some pointless uniform while we conquer the world." The room roars with cruel laughter, each chuckle a dagger twisting in my chest. My heart screams, my nails dig into my palms until they bleed, but the pain of their betrayal cuts deeper than anything I've ever felt. I'm nothing to them, just a shadow they've erased. For years, I've swallowed their scorn, their rejection, their lies. But they don't know I'm the one who saved their empire from collapse. They don't know I'm the storm they mocked. I'm Sophie Laurent. I'm 32 years old. And tonight, I'll make them choke on their words. I grew up in Vancouver's West End, in a penthouse where the Pacific rain battered floor-to-ceiling windows, but the real storm was inside. My father, Victor Laurent, ruled Laurent Financial Group, a titan in Canada's banking world, built from nothing in a gastown office. He wore tailored suits even to Canucks games, his voice sharp enough to cut through boardrooms. To him, success meant money, control, and a last name that opened doors. My mother, Elise, was different. A history professor who loved military strategy, she'd leave books on my bed, Clausewitz, Montgomery, even dog-eared journals about Vimy Ridge. She died when I was 15, hit by a drunk driver on Granville Street. Her last gift was a note tucked in a book, "Be who you choose, not who they demand." That note was my lifeline. Victor wanted me to be a polished Laurent daughter, smile at galas, study finance at UBC, marry a Bay Street heir. But I was obsessed with maps, war tactics, and the idea of serving in the Canadian Armed Forces. I'd spend hours sketching battle plans instead of balance sheets. My brother, Ethan, the golden heir to Laurent Financial, scoffed at my soldier games. Chloe, my sister, a lawyer with a tongue sharper than a Stanley Park wind, called me a dreamer who'd crash and burn. At family dinners, Victor would lecture about leveraged buyouts while I stared at my plate, dreaming of parade grounds at CFB Esquimalt. One night, I told Victor the first wanted to apply to the Royal Military College in Kingston. We were in his office, the Vancouver skyline glittering behind him. "The military," he spat, slamming his coffee mug on the desk. "You're a Laurent, not some grunt running drills in the rain." Ethan smirked from the doorway, "Stick to shopping, Sophie." Chloe added, "Don't embarrass us." Their words burned, but I held my ground, my mother's note echoing in my head. I was done being their perfect puppet. I'd forge my own path, even if it meant leaving them behind. I'm Sophie Laurent. I was 18 when I decided to stop begging for their approval. That choice would cost me everything, but it would also make me someone they'd never forget. The rain was relentless that spring in Vancouver, hammering the penthouse windows like it wanted to break through. I was 18, standing in my bedroom, staring at a suitcase I'd bought for $20 at a thrift shop on Commercial Drive. Inside were a few clothes, my mother's old military history books, and a folded note from her that I'd read 100 times, "Be who you choose." I'd made my choice. I'd applied to the Royal Military College in Kingston, Ontario, behind my family's back. I'd worked weekends at a sporting goods store in Kitsilano, saving every loonie to cover the application fee. When the acceptance letter arrived, my heart pounded like a drum in my chest. I'd done it. I'd earned a full scholarship to RMC, a chance to become something more than Victor Laurent's disposable daughter. But I knew showing that letter to my father would be like walking into a storm with no cover. I waited until evening, when the Vancouver skyline glowed through the rain-soaked windows of his office in the Bentall Centre. Victor sat behind his mahogany desk, reviewing stock charts, his face as cold as the North Shore Mountains in January. I clutched the envelope, my palms sweaty, and slid it across the desk. "What's this?" he asked, not looking up. "I got into the Royal Military College," I said, my voice steady despite the knot in my stomach. He froze, his pen hovering over a spreadsheet. Then he snatched the envelope, tore it open, and read the letter in 5 seconds flat. His eyes narrowed, and he ripped it in half, the pieces fluttering into the trash like dead leaves. "You want to play soldier," he sneered, leaning forward. "Fine. But don't expect a single cent from me. You're on your own." His words hit like a slap, but I didn't flinch. I'd expected this. I'd prepared for it. Still, the venom in his voice burned deeper than I thought possible. Ethan was leaning against the doorframe, his Canucks jersey wrinkled from a day at the rink. "Seriously, Sophie," he said, smirking. "You're gonna run around in the mud while we're running a multi-billion-dollar company? Good luck with that." Chloe, perched on a leather chair, didn't even look up from her phone. "Don't embarrass the family name," she said, her voice dripping with disdain. "You're not cut out for this. Stick to something softer." Their laughter echoed in my ears, a cruel chorus that made my chest ache. I wanted to scream, to tell them I wasn't the fragile doll they thought I was. But I just nodded, turned, and walked out. I wouldn't beg. I wouldn't break. My mother's voice whispered in my head, "Be who you choose." And I chose to leave. That night, I packed my suitcase in silence. No dramatic goodbyes, no tearful scenes. Just me, a thrift store duffel, and a pair of second-hand combat boots I'd found at a Granville Island market. They were scuffed, a half size too big, but they felt like mine. I slipped out of the penthouse at dawn, the city still cloaked in mist. The Skitran station at Burrard was nearly empty, the platform slick with rain. I bought a one-way ticket to Kingston, 3,500 kilometers away, with money I'd scraped together from my part-time job. As the train pulled away, I stared at the Vancouver skyline fading into the fog. Not one call came. Not one text from Victor, Ethan, or Chloe. Not even a "don't go." I was invisible to them, a ghost slipping out of their perfect world. My fingers tightened around my mother's note, tucked in my pocket. If I died on a training field, would they even notice? Would Victor spin it into a press release about family sacrifice? At the station, an old man in a toque asked if I was heading to a job interview. "Something like that," I muttered, my voice flat. He offered me a Tim Hortons coffee, but I shook my head. I didn't want to owe anyone anything, not anymore. The train ride to Kingston took 48 hours, crossing prairies and forests, the Rockies looming like a challenge in the distance. I sat by the window, watching the world blur by, my boots tapping the floor. Every kilometer took me further from the Laurent name, from the penthouse, from the weight of their expectations. But the pain didn't fade. It sat heavy in my chest, a cold stone I couldn't shake. Victor's words, "You're on your own," rang in my ears like a taunt. Fine, I thought. I'll show you what "on my own" looks like. I wasn't running away. I was running towards something, a life where I wasn't just a Laurent, but someone who mattered. Kingston, Ontario, hit me like a winter gale off Lake Ontario. The Royal Military College was no West End penthouse. It was all sharp edges, grey stone barracks, frost-covered parade grounds, and a schedule that chewed up weakness and spat it out. I was 18, a Vancouver girl in oversized combat boots, carrying my mother's note like a talisman, "Be who you choose." Those words kept me upright when my legs screamed during 5-kilometer runs at 5 a.m., when my hands blistered from rifle drills, and when the weight of being invisible to my family, Victor, Ethan, Chloe, pressed harder than the 20-kilogram pack on my back. I wasn't here to prove them wrong. I was here to prove I could be someone, even if no one back in Vancouver cared. The first week was a blur of barked orders and aching muscles. Cadets moved like machines, and I scrambled to keep up. My bunkmate, a wiry girl from Halifax named Tara, sized me up on day one. "You're that rich kid from Vancouver, eh?" she said, tossing her kit bag onto her bed. "Hope you're tougher than you look." I didn't answer. I just laced my boots tighter and hit the obstacle course, mud splashing up to my knees. The course was brutal, ropes that burned my palms, walls that felt 10 meters tall, and a wind that stung like a slap. I fell twice, my knees scraping gravel, but I got up. Always. Because every time I stumbled, I heard Victor's voice. You're on your own. Fine. I'd make it alone. Then came Ryan, a cocky cadet from Calgary with a smirk sharper than a bayonet. During a tactics drill, he leaned in close, his breath hot on my ear. What's a Laurent doing here? Shouldn't you be sipping lattes on Robson Street? I clenched my jaw, my mother's note burning in my pocket. In the next exercise, a mock ambush simulation, Ryan's plan collapsed, his team walked straight into a trap. I spoke up, sketching a flank maneuver on the whiteboard, my voice steady. Use the ridge for cover, send scouts ahead. Ryan scoffed. Relax, princess. Leave it to the real soldiers. The instructor, Fiota Claire Novak, a no-nonsense officer with eyes like steel, overheard. Lawrence right, she snapped. Run it her way. We did. The simulation succeeded. Ryan didn't look at me for the rest of the day. Claire became my anchor. She saw something in me, a knack for patterns, for seeing 3 moves ahead. One night, after a 10-kilometer march through sleet, she pulled me aside. You've got a brain for strategy, Laurent, she said, her voice low but firm. Don't let idiots like Ryan make you doubt it. I nodded, my throat tight. Her words felt like the first time someone saw me, not the Laurent name. I carried that with me, through nights spent memorizing field manuals under a flickering baroque light, through mornings polishing my boots until they shone like obsidian, through moments when I wanted to collapse but didn't. My mother's books, Clausewitz, Vimy Ridge Histories, were my escape. I'd trace her handwritten notes in the margins, her loops and underlines guiding me like a map. But the loneliness was a beast. At RMC, no one cared about my family's wealth or Victor's empire. That was freedom, but it was also a void. During our first personal time, a 10-minute window on a Friday night, most cadets called home. I stared at my phone, the screen blank. No messages from Victor. Nothing from Ethan or Chloe. Not even a passive-aggressive email. I slipped the phone back into my locker and opened my mother's journal instead. Her words, "Choose your direction," were scrawled on the inside cover. I read them until my eyes burned, not from tears but from exhaustion. I wasn't here to be loved. I was here to endure. By week 3, I was waking before the 5 a.m. horn, my uniform pressed, my bunk flawless. I passed inspections without a word, my boots hitting the ground in perfect rhythm. Ryan tried one last jab during a mess hall cleanup. Still think you're general material, Laurent, he muttered, scrubbing a tray beside me. I looked him dead in the eye. I don't think, Ryan. I know. He didn't reply. That night, I slept through the cold Kingston wind for the first time, my body too tired to care. The pain was still there, Victor's rejection, Ethan's smirk, Chloe's venom, but it wasn't a cage anymore. It was fuel. I was building something no one could take away, not even the Lawrence. 2 years into RMC, at 20 years old, I thought I'd built armor thick enough to block out the past. Kingston's brutal winters and relentless drills had hardened me, but a single email from Chloe cracked it all open. It landed in my inbox on a gray November morning, the subject line cold and formal, Ethan's engagement party. My brother was getting married, and the invitation felt like a dare. Join us at the Rosewood Hotel, Georgia, it read, to celebrate the Laurent family's next chapter. No personal note, no, we miss you, Sophie. Just a digital summons to Vancouver, 3,500 kilometers away. I stared at the screen, my dorm room silent except for the hum of a radiator. Part of me wanted to delete it, to keep running from the family that had erased me. But another part, the part that still remembered my mother's voice, whispered I could face them. Maybe, just maybe, they'd see me now. I booked a flight from Kingston to Vancouver, my stomach twisting with every click. The plane landed in a downpour, the kind of rain that soaks through your bones and makes Vancouver feel like it's grieving. I checked into a cheap motel near Burrard Street, far from the West End's glittering penthouses. The night of the party, I stood in front of a cracked mirror, smoothing my navy blazer. No uniform, no medals, just me. I walked into the Rosewoods ballroom, where chandeliers cast golden light over tables draped in white linen. The air smelled of expensive wine and privilege, and the crowd, Vancouver's elite, buzzed with laughter. Ethan stood at the center, his fiancée on his arm, his smile as polished as a Laurent financial ad. Chloe, in a sleek black dress, worked the room like a lawyer closing a deal. Victor was by the bar, his gray hair catching the light, his posture screaming control. I hadn't seen them in 2 years. No calls, no texts, not even a birthday card. I approached Ethan first, hoping for something, a nod, a smile. "Hey," I said, my voice quieter than I meant. He glanced at me, his eyes flicking over my blazer like it was an insult. "Didn't think you'd show," he said, turning back to his fiancée. "Military life too boring?" Chloe overheard, her laugh sharp as a Stanley Park wind. "Sophie, you look rugged," she said, her eyes scanning me like I was a case she'd already dismissed. "Don't trip over your boots and embarrass us." My chest tightened, but I forced a smile, clinging to my mother's note in my pocket, "Be who you choose." Then Victor took the stage, his voice booming over the clinking glasses. "Tonight, we celebrate Ethan, the future of Laurent Financial," he said, raising a glass. The crowd cheered. He went on, praising Chloe's legal brilliance, her unmatched Laurent spirit. Then his eyes landed on me, and the room seemed to hold its breath. "And Sophie," he said, his tone icy, "chose to abandon her family for some childish military fantasy. She's no Laurent, not anymore." The words hit like a fist, knocking the air from my lungs. The crowd murmured, some laughing, others averting their eyes. Ethan smirked, Chloe sipped her wine, and I stood frozen, the weight of their rejection heavier than any rucksack I'd carried at RMC. My nails dug into my palms, but I didn't cry. I wouldn't give them that. I turned and walked out, the rain hitting my face as I stepped onto Georgia Street. It poured harder now, soaking my blazer, my hair, my heart. I stood under a street lamp, the glow blurring through the downpour, and felt the truth sink in. I wasn't just invisible to them, I was erased. Victor had disowned me in front of Vancouver's elite, and neither Ethan nor Chloe had said a word. The pain was a living thing, clawing at my chest, deeper than anything I'd felt in Kingston's mud or cold. I pulled out my phone, my hands shaking, and called my aunt, Marie Dubois, the only family who'd ever cared. "They don't want me," I said, my voice breaking. "They never did." Marie's voice was soft but firm. "You don't need them, Sophie. You're stronger than their name." I hung up, the rain mixing with the tears I couldn't hold back anymore. I didn't want pity. I wanted to fight. And I would. 12 years after I left Vancouver, I stood in the Fairmont Hotel's Pacific Ballroom, the same place where my father's words had once tried to bury me. I was 32 now, a major general in the Canadian Armed Forces, my dress uniform traded for a navy suit to avoid drawing eyes. Victor Lawrence's retirement dinner was a spectacle, crystal chandeliers casting light over tables draped in white, the air thick with the scent of wealth and whiskey. Vancouver's elite filled the room, their Canucks cufflinks glinting as they toasted the man who'd built Laurent Financial Group. I stood near the back, my heart a tight knot, not because I wanted their approval, but because I'd come to face them one last time. Ethan, now running the company, worked the crowd with his trademark smirk. Chloe, ever the sharp-tongued lawyer, sipped champagne, her eyes scanning for weaknesses. Victor, gray but still commanding, held court like a king. I'd flown 3,500 kilometers from Kingston for this, not out of hope, but defiance. After the pain of Ethan's engagement party 2 years ago, when Victor declared me no Laurent, I'd sworn I'd never return. But my work, leading a cyber defense task force, had saved Canada's financial grid, including Laurent Financial, from a catastrophic attack. I hadn't told them. They didn't deserve to know. But tonight, I'd let the truth speak for itself. As I sipped water, avoiding the wine, Victor took the stage, his voice booming over the clinking glasses. "Tonight, we celebrate legacy," he began, his eyes sweeping the room. He praised Ethan's vision, Chloe's brilliance, and then, inevitably, his gaze found me. The crowd hushed. "And Sophie," he said, his voice dripping with disdain, "who chose to waste her life playing soldier instead of building something real." Laughter rippled through the room, sharp and cruel, like shards of glass. Ethan grinned. Chloe raised an eyebrow, amused. My nails bit into my palms, but I stood still, my face a mask of calm. I'd learned at RMC to take blows without flinching. Then a voice cut through the room like a gunshot. "Excuse me, are you Major General Sophie Laurent?" Every head turned. Richard Bennett, chairman of Laurent Financial Group, stood at the center table, his silver hair catching the light, his Scotch glass steady in his hand. The room froze, glasses paused mid-air, murmurs died. Victor's smile faltered. I nodded, my voice clear. "Yes, sir. That's me." Bennett stepped forward, his eyes sharp, commanding attention. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, his voice carrying the weight of a general's order, "do you know who this woman is? She led the cyber defense task force that stopped the largest attack on Canada's financial system in history. Laurent Financial would be ashes without her." Gasps echoed. A glass shattered near the bar. Ethan's smirk vanished, his face pale as the linen tablecloth. Chloe's champagne trembled in her hand. Victor gripped the podium, his knuckles white, his jaw tight as if he'd swallowed ice. Bennett wasn't done. "Sophie didn't just serve," he continued, turning to me. "She built the firewall that now protects half of Canada's banking sector, including this company. While you laughed, she saved your empire." The applause started slow, hesitant, then roared like a tidal wave off English Bay. I stood still, my heart pounding, not from pride but from the sheer weight of being seen. Victor's eyes met mine, not with regret, but with something worse, shock, as if he'd never imagined I could be more than his failure. Ethan stared at the floor, his hands clenched. Chloe looked away, her composure cracking. I didn't smile. I didn't gloat. I just stood there, letting the truth do the talking. "I was invited as family," I said to Bennett, my voice low but steady. "Not a keynote speaker." A few chuckles broke the tension, but the air was thick with unspoken apologies. Bennett placed a hand on my shoulder, his voice softer now. "We honor Victor tonight for his years in finance," he said, "but let's take a moment for a woman who served her country, and this company, without asking for applause." The crowd clapped again, louder, the sound rolling through the ballroom like thunder. I nodded once, polite but unshaken, and stepped back, my suit suddenly feeling heavier than my RMC pack. As I moved to the sidewall, the stares followed, some curious, some ashamed. A woman in a red dress, a CFO from a partner firm, leaned in. "You owe them nothing," she whispered. She was right. For the first time, I didn't feel the weight of the Laurent name. I felt free. The applause in the Fairmont Hotel's Pacific Ballroom faded, but the weight of that night clung to me like Vancouver's November rain. I was 32, standing on the edge of the room, the echoes of Richard Bennett's words, praising me as the Major General who saved Laurent Financial, still ringing in my ears. The crowd's eyes followed me, some with awe, others with guilt, but I didn't care about them. I watched Victor, my father, slump against the podium, his face a mask of shock, as if the empire he'd built had just crumbled under the truth. Ethan, my brother, stood frozen, his Canucks cufflinks glinting as he avoided my gaze. Chloe, my sister, gripped her champagne flute so tightly I thought it would shatter. For the first time, they weren't laughing. They weren't in control. I didn't feel triumph, just a quiet, hard-earned clarity. I'd spent years chasing their approval, but now I knew I didn't need it. I slipped out of the ballroom, the cold air of Georgia Street hitting my face like a wake-up call. My phone buzzed as I walked, the screen lighting up with Victor's name. I almost didn't answer, but something made me press accept. "Sophie," he said, his voice low, strained, like he was chewing gravel. "You made a fool of me tonight." My blood surged, hot and sharp. "No, Dad," I said, my tone steady but cutting. You did that yourself when you called me a failure in front of your world. He paused, the silence heavy with years of unspoken resentment. You could have told me, he muttered. You never asked, I shot back. He cleared his throat, then hung up without another word. I stood under a street lamp, the rain starting to fall, and felt the weight of his call settle into my bones, not as pain, but as proof I'd outgrown his shadow. Back in Kingston, I returned to my routine at CFB Esquimalt, where I'd been stationed after RMC. The base was a world away from Vancouver's glitz, grey hangars, the sharp tang of sea air, and drills that started before dawn. But it was home. My apartment, a small one-bedroom overlooking the Strait of Juan de Fuca, was where I found peace. Mia Tremblay, my partner, was waiting when I got back, her dark hair pulled into a messy bun, a cup of Tim Hortons coffee in her hand. How'd it go? She asked, her eyes searching mine. I sat on the couch, my suit still creased from the flight. They know who I am now, I said, my voice soft but firm. But it doesn't change anything. Mia took my hand, her touch steady. It changes you, she said. You're not carrying their weight anymore. She was right. For the first time, I felt unburdened, like the 3,500-kilometer distance between me and Vancouver was more than just geography. A week later, an email arrived from Ethan. I was in my office, reviewing cyber defense protocols, when it popped up. No subject line, just his name. Sophie, it read, I was wrong. I saw you as a threat, not a sister. I was jealous, you built a life I never had the guts to chase. I'm sorry. I stared at the words, my coffee growing cold. Ethan, the golden heir, admitting he was jealous? It felt like a crack in the Loran fortress. I didn't reply, not yet. But I saved the email, a small piece of proof that the truth had shaken them. Chloe didn't reach out, but I heard from Marie, my aunt, that she'd left the party early, her usual composure gone. She's not used to being wrong, Marie said over the phone, her voice warm with pride. But you showed her, Sophie. Marie sent a package that arrived days later, wrapped in plain brown paper. Inside was my mother's old compass, the one Elise carried during her research trips to Vimy Ridge sites. A note was tucked beside it, in Marie's neat handwriting, your mother always knew you'd find your way. I held the compass, its brass cool against my palm, and traced the engraved words, choose your direction. I didn't cry, but my chest ached with something softer than pain, gratitude. Elise was gone, but she was still guiding me, more than Victor ever had. I placed the compass on my desk, next to a photo of Mia and me hiking in Pacific Spirit Park. That night, I slept without the old nightmares of Vancouver's cold penthouse. The silence wasn't empty anymore. It was mine. Standing on my Kingston apartment balcony, the Strait of Juan de Fuca stretching out like a promise, I finally understood what it meant to be free. I was 32, a major general who'd faced Victor's scorn, Ethan's smirk, and Chloe's venom, only to rise above them all. The night at the Fairmont Hotel, when Richard Bennett called out my name and shattered their illusions, wasn't just a victory, it was a reckoning. I didn't need their applause or their regret. I'd built a life that didn't bend to their rules. My mother, Elise, taught me that through her compass, her note, choose your direction. And I did, through 3,500 kilometers of doubt, through rain-soaked Vancouver nights and Kingston's icy drills. I chose to be Sophie Loran, not a Loran pawn. If you've ever felt invisible, like your family or your world wrote you off, listen to me. You don't need their permission to matter. I stood in that ballroom, my heart pounding, not because I wanted Victor's pride, but because I'd earned my own. You can too. Start small, grab a notebook, like I did at RMC, and write one thing you believe in. Maybe it's a dream, like joining the Canadian Armed Forces, or something quieter, like teaching history, as Mia does. Take one step today. Walk 100 meters toward it, then another. Don't wait for a spotlight like the one Richard gave me. Be your own. I learned that in the mud of Kingston's training fields, in the silence of a phone that never rang with Victor's voice. You are enough, even when they say you're not. Mia said something that night, as we sat with Tim Hortons cups, the sea breeze sharp against our faces. You didn't just survive them, Sophie, she said, her voice steady. You became someone they can't ignore. She was right. And you can be that person too. If your family, your city, your past ever made you feel small, let it fuel you. Write your story, one choice at a time. Share it in the comments below. What's the one thing you're fighting for? Because I'm here, still standing, telling you, you don't need their name to shine. The rain has stopped tonight, and I'm standing on a rocky shore near Kingston, the Strait of Juan de Fuca, whispering secrets to the stars. I'm Sophie Laurent, 32 years old, no longer the girl who begged for Victor's approval or flinched at Ethan's smirk and Chloe's venom. That night at the Fairmont, when Richard Bennett's voice broke through their laughter, I didn't just win, I found peace. Not because my family finally saw me, but because I saw myself. My mother's compass, heavy in my hand, points to a truth I've carried through 3,500 kilometers of doubt: I am enough. If you've ever felt erased, like your dreams were mocked or your worth ignored, know this: you can write your own story. Start today, one step, one choice. This is why I share my story on True North Courage. If it hit you, if it stirred something real, please hit that like button. Drop a comment, tell me what you're fighting for, what keeps you going. And if you want more stories of grit and heart, subscribe to True North Courage. Let's build a community that stands tall, together, no matter the storm.